So the next up, we're very lucky to have Natalie, Bettger. Sorry if I'm butchering your name, Natalie, who coincidentally been working with for a number of years. But she's a senior program manager for congestion management and system operations at the North Central Texas Council of Government. She oversees efforts related to transportation systems management and operations, aviation, congestion management, safety, security, special events, public involvement, and marketing. Her responsibilities also include coordinating with partner agencies to implement congestion management system projects. And I might add my own 2 cents there that Natalie participates with us at the national level from several different programs, and is always a valuable resource. So with that, Natalie, take it away.
Well, thank you, Paul, for the very nice introduction. I appreciate that. I appreciate working with you all. So I'm going to cover today planned special events and kind of what we're doing in the Dallas-Fort Worth area to prepare for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. You'll see that I follow a lot of what Vasali just covered related to the FHWA checklist, and I'm going to go through kind of things that we've worked through from a regional perspective to prepare for the FIFA World Cup. So Vasali went through this chart already, but I have taken it and I've looked at things from our region's perspective, what things maybe we've completed the initial effort for and things that we're starting to initiate the efforts for. You can see the checks vary across the graph, and that's really because each agency, each region, again, it's a checklist. You pick and choose things that work for your region. Different regions, different events are going to have different check boxes. And so what's really cool about the checklist is you can pick things that are applicable to your region, things that are applicable to the event that is occurring. But it is a great resource to allow you to do that and not forget things. I think that's the big thing, is sometimes we start working on these events and where do we start? What all do we need to think about? And this checklist provides a resource for that to allow you to make sure that you're looking at things you need to and making sure that you're not overlooking things that might be very critical for the event or for the transportation system within your area that you're covering the event for. So the first item I'm going to cover is the information and data collection. Again, I'm going to see if I'm applying these to what we're doing within the region and some of the lessons learned based on past events that we've implemented. So one thing that Vasali brought up is reviewing these past events. Again, looking at attendance, looking at travel forecast, definitely third-party data for past events and looking at that impact on the transportation system, whether it's different modes, different times a day, day a week. Those can all be applied on events moving forward. And that's really what we start looking at when we started looking at, okay, we got dates assigned for the World Cup events. What dates do we have? What day a week do these fall? We currently don't have any information on the time of day yet for these events, but if we can start looking on days a week, we can start thinking about what strategies maybe need to be in place to provide good service on those days of the events and maybe reduce some of our background traffic within the region, specifically around event travel and regular weekday travel for regular commuters. Building on your strengths. Again, this is going to vary by region as well. Our strengths are different. You know, Dallas-Fort Worth has a very large, robust transportation system, lots of roads within our region. We have limited transit that goes to the stadium where the World Cup's going to be held, where other areas may look at it and they may have a very robust transit system that feeds to that event venue. So determine your strengths, build off those strengths, and add supplemental projects that help complement those strengths within your region. A few other things that that we try to do: call ladder, which is Vasali brought up points of contact. This we started implementing when we initiated work with the Super Bowl back in 2011, which became very, very handy because we had this call ladder, we had this point of contact. So different times a year, different days a week, different things are going to come up. For example, during the Super Bowl, we got a lot of snow and ice that week, which luckily we had a snow and ice plan, but there was also power outages that were associated with that event. And so on our call ladder, we actually had energy company contacts. And so at that point, my director, Michael Morris, was calling around to these contacts because there were rolling blackouts, and we needed to understand how that impacted the transportation system, how it impacted routes that folks would take from the hotels to the event. And so that call ladder really does come in handy because you don't know what kind of thing that's going to happen that you're not expecting. And so having direct point of contact really helps that. The other thing I would stress on this slide is creating committees. So there's lots of stuff that has to be done to prepare for these events. And so what we try to do within our region is create unique committees that allow us to dig in deeper and get into the details of some of these items. The next slide, you'll see that we have outlined several committees that we're organizing for the World Cup. We've done similar committees for past events, but we allow these committees to dig into the detail, and then they report back to a larger transportation group. So you'll see roadway operations. We bring in folks from our mobility assistance, roadside assistance, different programs that we have. We have an aviation group that meets to talk about reservation systems for general aviation facilities. We also look at bringing in the technology companies, Uber and Lyft, to talk to them about where they should drop off and pick up people, maybe even routes to and from the event venue. You'll see also on here transit, limousine, vehicle for hire. You know, we have different groups that talk about these different subject matters and bring, you know, they can really dig in and bring recommendations back to a larger group that allows us to move forward with that. In addition to just data collection and information, the next step is really assessing event-oriented risk. You know, we all need to look at risks that occur as we look at events. You know, what are possible things that could come up, again, that allow us to then rely on our call ladder. But some of these things that help with that is we've mapped out events by day and by location. Again, knowing where the events occur within your region, within your state, is always good to know. So then you can estimate maybe where you need to stage resources and things to that sort, so you can accommodate these events that might occur that are unexpected. Demonstrations and protests. This is an area that you'll see that we try to coordinate a lot with the safety and security group. So many of these events that occur, there's a safety and security group that's usually separate from transportation. And so understanding and letting them know the types of transportation items that you're working on and asking who the point of contact is or who you need to share that with from the safety and security group allows these groups to interact because, again, they're looking at security threats. We're looking at how do we move people around the region? How do we get them to the event on time safely? And so those are things that need to collaborate across the different groups. And so understanding from safety and security, maybe protest or demonstrations that might occur that we could then do adjustments to our roadway routing and things to that sort is very important. Another big item that's come up related to the World Cup is how many unticketed ticketless event patrons are going to travel on the system to get around the event venue. This is something that we really don't have a good understanding of yet. We hope over the next year we get more information on this so we can prepare for how much of an influx of people are going to come around the stadium itself as these events occur. And so those are things we'll work very closely with the safety and security group on as well. As you move on to item C, assessment of external factors affecting scope of the event. In this particular area, we look at several things. One is our supply side. So what type of system do we have to provide service for the demand that's going to need to get to and from the stadium? Where are they coming from? How do they get there? What mode do they take? So these are multiple elements that we look at on the supply side. Do we have enough to accommodate the demand? So we have a managed lane, a reversible managed lane that provides access to the Dallas Stadium, which is actually in Arlington. And there's a T-ramp that allows folks to exit. So we've been talking about hours of operation for that reversible managed lane. Usually we use it dedicated to the commute traffic. But for World Cup events, we are going to be changing the hours of operation depending on what time of day these events occur, because we do have 7 events that occur during the week. So we need to make sure we accommodate that traffic going to the stadium. Other things that we work very closely with the stadium on is, as they issue parking passes, we want to provide a route for that vehicle to get from their origin to that parking lot. Because if they're coming from the south, we don't want them going north and then coming back south into the parking lot. So we would work on routes that allow them from their origin to get direct access into those parking facilities and not causing more traffic by driving the wrong direction or further north than they need to get to that parking facility. In addition to that, we look at, we plan this bus bridge that allows for excess capacity of transit if needed after the event, to allow folks to get to different locations within the region. And that's another element that we're trying to accommodate and make sure we have a available capacity to transport these folks. In addition to supply side, there's also external factors like weather. In past events, a lot of them have been more in the winter time around here. So we usually do a snow and ice plan. We stage resources. TxDOT brings in resources from across the state and stages them within our region for those major special events to make sure that we can have the roadways clear. But this event, the World Cup coming up, is a lot different because it's happening in the summer in Texas. Which is very hot. So we have to plan a little bit differently. There's shade structures that need to be in place at transit locations that maybe we haven't planned for in the past, hydration type facilities that need to be available. So those are some new elements that we're looking at for the World Cup, just because we know it's going to be very hot here when that occurs. In addition to that, we usually always try to map out our construction activities within the regions. And we work very closely with the Texas Department of Transportation to put in their contracts. So when they've started these contracts and we knew we were getting the World Cup, they put in terminology within their contracts that has minimal disruption during World Cup activities. And so we've worked with them to include that in there. And so for those types of construction activities, it will be limited, but it's still good to map where they're located at and if there are any lane constrictions that are occurring during the couple months during the World Cup activities. As we move on to D, I think we went back a slide. There we go. Contingency planning. So this is another element that comes into play as we look at events. We always focus within our region is people pay a lot of money to go to these events. We need to make sure they get there on time and are able to enjoy the game. And so we put a lot of contingency planning into our planning activities that we do to be prepared for things that occur. We do things like staging tow trucks along critical routes. And these tow trucks usually are ones that are under the city ordinance. But then the city can dispatch them directly. The police can dispatch them directly to get to the scene more quickly and get the roadway cleared, so that way it doesn't slow down other traffic getting into and out of the event. We also work with our transit agencies to stage extra transit vehicles, again, as contingency. If we need more transit buses to make direct routes to downtown Dallas and downtown Fort Worth, we have the ability to do that. So we stage those in place, knowing that we might have issues with buses that might break down. We might have excess capacity of transit riders after the event. Because one thing we have learned is folks that take the technology companies to the event, it costs them $50 to get to the event. After the event, they're stuck with, oh, it's going to cost you $200 to get there. So we usually send them in these transit vehicles. We stage the transit and the technology companies together, close together. So if somebody doesn't want to pay the $200 for the technology company, we send them on the transit bus and get them to a location where it won't be quite as much of a bill to get a technology company to get where they need to go. So that's one contingency that we learned early on, that this is occurring in some ways to help people and patrons so that they're not gouged after the event, because that's usually when the prices are extremely high. In addition to that, we do dry runs. So transit is not usually a service that's provided to our event venue. And so one thing that we'll be doing over the next summer is doing dry runs to allow transit and checking out the parking facilities, the parking lot where we want to have it, our transit stations occupy, make sure the route works, sure the turning radiuses work, talk with the transit agencies and make sure that they're on board and the grade and the amenities that are provided at that lot meet the need. So these dry runs help us learn. One thing we learned in the past is we give them a route to take sometimes, these buses, and what we learned from one past event, they didn't take our route. They decided they would get on Waze, the bus driver, and take whatever route they wanted because they were charter buses and charter bus drivers. And so we learned, though, in the next round of events, we need to put in the clause, they take our route, or maybe they don't get paid for that route. And so those are things that you learn as you do these dry runs that you wouldn't know about until the event occurs. So anytime you have an opportunity to do dry runs to implement your plan, it's really helpful because you learn a lot about what works and what maybe doesn't work so well. On the next item, element E, event operations planning. Again, this is another area that we looking at routing of shuttle buses, mapping from hotels to event venues, identifying what the best route is, maybe by time of day, because again, it might vary. Your route that you want to send these shuttle buses on is going to vary based on the time of day and the traffic that occurs on those routes during that time. And so we went through a process to map this for the Super Bowl events, is looking at when they would travel between these venues, between the hotel, and telling them what route might work best, varying by time of day. In addition to that, a few other items that we're looking at is I guess, movement around our Fan Fest and our International Broadcasting Center. And those are areas that we need to make sure we have good circulation, good access to patrons to get in and out of those facilities around the Dallas area. And another thing that we have found is this baton or gap analysis. So as patrons move from one mode of transportation to another, there needs to be trailblazing signs, wayfinding signs that let them know how to get from one to another, transfer points. These are areas that we're looking at very closely to see, how do we sign them, how do we mark them, how do we make sure people know where they're going and don't get lost in those transition zones. So we can make sure they get around the region seamlessly, because we have multiple operators that operate different modes, different services, and we don't want folks to be confused as to how to move from one to the other. So this gap analysis, this baton pass, is another area that we're looking at very closely. In terms of the next step, step F, selection of measures of effectiveness. We have not started this step. We have collected performance measures on past events, usually looking at things related to transit ridership, speeds on roadways. As we've mentioned before, now that we have speed data, historical speed data, we can easily pull that information up. We can pull it from the DOT sensors that are on the roadway. Other things that we want to track is connection points. Again, talking about that baton pass, did people find it easy to transition from one mode to a next and get around within our system? And then post-event debriefings, I think, are also very important. So if things happen, you have the ability to talk about those and put new plans in place before the next event occurs. And speaking of multiple events, this next slide, I just wanted to highlight, it's a really cool opportunity for our region, because usually we develop a plan for one main event, and that main event happens one day at one time. Well, the World Cup gives us a unique opportunity that we have 9 events. And so each time we can debrief and figure out things that worked well, things that maybe didn't work so well. And we get to try to implement these improvements throughout the process. So it's a really cool opportunity for our region to be able to not just do it one time and be done, but we have 9 opportunities to get better and improve each time we get an event that comes to our region. And so we're really excited to be able to test things and see how they worked, and see what improvements we need to make before the next round comes up. Some you'll see are very short time frame between events, and then others is longer, which would give us more opportunity to implement more strategies and make more adjustments. And then this last slide, just a quick highlight of next steps for our region. Our committees, we continue to lean on to specialize in those areas of their expertise and bring recommendations back to our larger transportation committee. We do have, all regions are working on these draft local area traffic management plans that are required by FIFA by the end of March of 2025. Our region is working on a public safety security exercise around transit, which we've hired a consultant to help us with in the summer of 2025. And then the final local traffic management plan is due at the end of December of 2025. And with that, I will turn it back over to Paul.